All right, y'all, welcome to the show. I have an awesome one for you today. So first, we're going to get into Biden's student loan debt reduction. The case is now being heard by the Supreme Court. I'll tell you how it's going. We'll get to some of the reactions to the case. Then later on, we'll dive into MSNBC is gloves off now on anybody who dares compete with Joe Biden. Of course, we know Marianne Williamson is poised to announce her run shortly, so it's going to get ugly. And then later on in the show, we have landlords are making TikToks, and they're reminding everybody why landlords suck. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it here. So this is an article in NPR. Biden's student loan relief faces its biggest test yet at the Supreme Court. So you guys know the deal. Biden's student loan debt reduction survived a number of court cases that were trying to slap it down, but ran into a wall when there were two cases where they paused it. And so now it's being appealed. The Biden administration is fighting the attempt of the courts to slap this down. It's now with the Supreme Court, and they're going to, determine the fate of this round of student loan debt reduction. So here's what they say. A handful of Republican-dominated states will ask the Supreme Court on Tuesday to permanently block the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness program. The states contend that the president exceeded his legal authority when he implemented a program to cancel up to $20,000 in debt for people holding federal student loans. So we'll get to whether or not that's merited in a second, whether or not he actually overstepped his legal authority. But I should just point out here, this reminds me of when a bunch of Republican states did not accept the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. There were a bunch of red states that were just given the opportunity, hey, millions of poor people in your respective states should get health care. The federal government is going to pick up the tab for the first few years, and then you'll split it with them after that. And the red states were just like, no, we don't want to give health care to poor people in our state. So we don't want to expand Medicaid. It just ruthless, vicious, partisan, tribalist nonsense. They just didn't want to sign on to it because it was a Democrat's law. Well, now you have an issue where this move from Biden would help so many people in these red states, and the state is like, no, what if we killed that? What if you didn't get the help that you want? And by the way, it's not like this is just helping Democrats, it also would help Republicans. They're trying to block it. While the Biden administration is aggressively defending the program in court, the president did not announce the program until August 2022, and then only under pressure from the left wing of his own party. Now, that's accurate, but I also kind of file that under the category of, I don't care as long as you do it. And he did it, so you got to give credit where it's due. And also, since he's fighting for it in court, that shows you they think they have a legal case on this particular issue. Now, there was one lawsuit where they didn't appeal. It was the student loan forgiveness for even the privately held loans. They lost something in court over that, and then they realized, I don't think we have a solid legal case to win on this front. And so that particular part of the student loan debt reduction they dropped, but they've continued to fight for the bulk of the student loan debt reduction. And I think that shows that they have faith in their ability to potentially win this. Now, again, it's difficult because you're running up against a conservative Supreme Court, but certainly on the legal merits, they think they have an argument. Ultimately, the administration concluded that it did have the authority to enact such a loan forgiveness plan under a law called the HEROES Act, passed by Congress after the 9/11 attacks. The law is meant to ensure that federal student loan borrowers will not be economically clobbered in a national emergency or a war or disaster. The law specifically says that when the president declares such an emergency, the Secretary of Education has the power to waive or modify any statutory or regulatory provision governing student loan programs. So, look, this is important to point out here is this was the legal justification that they used. During the pandemic, the Trump and Biden administrations both invoked the law to pause student debt payments without penalties. The Biden plan goes further. It provides economically disadvantaged borrowers can qualify for as much as $20,000 in cancellation of their student debt. Those earning more money, up to $125,000, could qualify for as much as $10,000 in debt relief. Already, 16 million student loan borrowers have been approved for some loan forgiveness, 90% of them earning less than $75,000, according to the administration. Now, keep that number in mind because we're going to get to something where that's relevant in a minute. The Biden plan, however, has not yet paid out any money because 2 lower courts have put the program on hold, sending the case to the Supreme Court. On Tuesday, the justices will hear expedited arguments in a challenge to the Biden plan brought by 6 states: Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, Arkansas, Kansas, and South Carolina, all pretty conservative states. So here's the legal argument. The merits of the case are fairly straightforward. Does the 2003 law, known as the HEROES Act, give the president and his Secretary of Education the power to authorize federal student loan forgiveness? Yes, says University of Texas law professor Stephen Vladeck, who consulted informally with the White House on the case. He says the words of the statute are clear and expansive. Quote, "This is a stunningly broad grant of authority from Congress to the Secretary of Education," Vladeck says. The plain text of the statute is not vague when it talks about the Secretary's power to waive or modify any statutory or regulatory provision applicable to programs like federal student aid. So in other words, we had the national emergency of COVID. We had the pandemic. Under that law, any emergency, the government can then turn around and use that to, adjust the student loan program. Because remember, the government owns 90% of student loan debt. And so, according to this expert, he says it's a pretty straightforward interpretation of the law that this is indeed legal and constitutional. But Case Western University law professor Jonathan Adler says waiving or modifying loan requirements is not the same thing as canceling the obligation to pay back some or all of the loan. Adler concedes the statute's language is broad, but he says it is likely not explicit enough for the conservative Supreme Court of today. Very conservative Supreme Court of today. Quote, "It's certainly fair to claim that the court is putting a thumb on the scale in the way the statutory language like this is being interpreted," Adler says, adding that the court, when in doubt, assumes Congress didn't give any agency the power. If we have to argue about, well, we read the statute this way or we read it the other, the Department of Education has already lost, he says. So in other words, the Supreme Court is going to take their own bias and superimpose it onto their interpretation of the law. And this is the problem that we've run into time and time again with this super conservative court. They say, the executive branch doing this thing or that thing is unconstitutional because you weren't granted direct ability to do this by Congress. But then, you read the law in question, and they were granted the authority by Congress to do it. But they demand that the language be so insanely specific that no law can ever be implemented by the executive branch in a straightforward way. Because they'll just say, no, that's not good enough. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency, they regulate greenhouse gas emissions because that leads to climate change, all sorts of problems. And so the Environmental Protection Agency, they are doing environmental protection by regulating the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. The Supreme Court stepped in and said they're not allowed to do that. What? This is the EPA doing EPA stuff. It's the most straightforward interpretation you could ever imagine. They go, no, but it wasn't specific enough. And so then that forced Congress and the IRA to slip in a provision that says, okay, we're going to define greenhouse gas emissions as a pollutant. So now the EPA does have the legal authority to regulate carbon emissions. So they got away with it. But look, I guarantee you, if there's another case that gets to the Supreme Court, they'll probably slap that down too and be like, no, that's you're wrongly defining it as a pollutant. So therefore, the provision is not direct enough to give the EPA the authority to do environmental protection. It's a dumb game. They act like, oh, we're objective, we're above it all, but then they're not at all objective. All of their decisions are just injecting their own bias into the reading of the law. Every single one. So this is what's called judicial activism, but it's from the right. And of course, that's ironic because it's the left that's accused of being judicially activist. Okay, so now we go to this. The reaction from right-wing media. This is, you've seen similar arguments from when he did the student loan debt reduction. Let's hear what they have to say.
That's right. And I think the reason why we know that Biden announced this in August, just before the election, it was a play for votes. It was an attempt to buy votes. And, when I talk to Iowans, folks in my state, I hear a lot of people upset. I mean, many people like myself, I worked hard to pay off my college and law school debt. Worked hard. Nobody forgave it for me. Also, many other people work hard entering the workforce, and, you know, nothing is there to help them with the student debt cancellation. They're on the hook for it, in fact.
Well, it's incredible because it's more election interference. You make a great point. He came out with this right before the election. So, again, there he won again, right? He's in the White House, AJ.
That's right. And I think the reason...
These people are unbelievable, man. These people are truly unbelievable. So the argument is like, oh, they're buying... This is like they're buying votes, bro. This is like corruption. So let me get this straight. It is not corruption for politicians to take money from billionaires and corporations and then do the bidding of said billionaires and corporations against the will of the people. That is not corruption. But it is corruption for the government to do the will of the people and something that actually helps working people. That is corruption. This is backwards land. Notice how they flip everything on its head. It's somehow corrupt and buying votes to do the will of the people and help people out. But it's not corrupt to be literally corrupt, to have legalized bribes and help out the corporations and billionaires against the will of everybody else in the country. Now, by the way, one of the other arguments you've seen floated around is this helps rich people. Marsha Blackburn tweeted that. Oh, this is just a giveaway to rich people. We literally just showed the numbers. 90% of the recipients make $75,000 a year or less. 90%. When you are dealing with actual rich people, their parents pay off their college. They don't need loans. They don't need loans. So incredibly dishonest. So now here is the terrible update I have to share with you guys. Breaking news, the Supreme Court's conservative majority seemed deeply skeptical of the legality of the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness plan. Wow. So understand again, let me repeat this. Trump used the same legal justification to pause student loans. He also used the same legal justification to eliminate some very narrow student loan debt. I forget the exact category. It might have been like injured veterans or something like that. Like there was some very narrow groups. He was like, we're just going to totally forgive your student debt. To his credit. I mean, it's good. I'm glad he did that, right? He used this justification. Biden used the exact same justification, saying, hey, under this HEROES Act, we have the national emergency of the pandemic, so instead of just pausing it, we're going to eliminate it because we hold the debt, so we can make the decision what to do with the debt. Federal government holds 90% of the debt. That's not, nobody argues against that. That's a stone-cold fact. But it still looks like they're going to slap it down. All right, so look, what should be done? The answer is very simple. The answer is very straightforward. The Biden administration is fighting and has appealed to this point, so clearly they think they have a case on this front. They didn't have a case on the private loan portion, but with this one they do. What they should do is, when the Supreme Court slaps it down, Biden should come out the very next day and say, very clearly, now we're going to do the exact same plan under the 1965 Higher Education Act, which gives the Secretary of Education the full discretion and authority to do whatever they want with those loans. Again, the federal government holds the loans. They can do what they want with it. And the 1965 Higher Education Act, it's a more straightforward interpretation of that law, even more straightforward than this one that they used. So we should just come out, do it again, and do it with this justification. And then look, if they sue again, it goes through the courts again, and Biden loses again, we need to stop. There's no more pretending in any way, shape, or form that we live in under a democratic system. That would effectively be judicial tyranny. You're already bordering on judicial tyranny with this absurd far-right Supreme Court. This biased, very ideological Supreme Court that does not do the plain-faced reading of the law and a straightforward interpretation. They inject their own politics into it time and time again. They are Federalist Society goons who have an agenda. And this was the long game that was played by the Republicans, and it paid off. The long game was, let's just pack the courts full of right-wing tyrants to skew everything in a right-wing direction, and it's working. It's working for them to this point. That's why everybody fears anytime Congress and the president even manage to do something good, it's like, okay, well, is it going to pass Supreme Court muster? Cross your fingers. Cross your fingers. Who knows? Because what they do is, it's nuanced trolling is what it is. That's their trick. They'll go through every single line of the law and purposefully be obtuse and misinterpret it to claim the law doesn't mean what it actually means with a plain-faced reading of it. And they say, because of that, it's illegal for you to carry out this law. That's all it is. That's all it is. Clearly, the president can do whatever they want. The Secretary of Education can do whatever they want with those loans. And they're trying to say, no, you can't, because we want to force those people to pay it back. Well, look, either way, this might be the controversial take, but I'll say it. Either way, I think this helps Biden, because Biden did the student loan debt reduction. Biden fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. So if you have a deeply conservative Supreme Court strike down this student loan debt reduction, you think people aren't going to remember who stabbed them in the back? And this is a potent issue for Biden and Democrats, if they're smart enough to use it, to say, look, we're trying to help you out. You can see who's blocking it. You can see who the problem is here. And then again, if he were to come out and say, well, we're gonna eliminate, I would eliminate all student loan debt and do it through the 1965 Higher Education Act. How you like them apples? Then again, it would be very clear to people who's fighting for you and who's fighting against you. And so there you have it. But the bad news of the day is the Supreme Court is very skeptical of one of the few very good things that Biden did. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.